Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session this afternoon. Before I introduce Ariel, I just first of all like to thank the University of Melbourne, and Ibu Denok from the University of Melbourne is at the back there, for facilitating this presentation. It's not often that we have a visiting academic from Australia, and it's very useful for us and very useful for you. And so our appreciation to the University of Melbourne. As you know, they have an office on the third floor of this building, and we work very well with them. So thank you, Ibu Denok, and your colleagues for this. We welcome also today Michael Brasher from APS, and you all know who Michael is. So I would now like to introduce Ariel. This is very strange, I have to say, because Ariel was my student many, many years. So we've both had different career paths. A long time ago, before most of you were born, I was an English language lecturer at Satya University in Salatiga, and Ariel was a first-year student at that time. And so we've spent a bit of time before this just catching up on the last 20 or so years, 20 being very generous. So since then, one of us has had a very glittering career, and it's not me. Ariel then, as you read in the information that we circulated, Ariel went on to from Satyawachana to the University of Michigan, and then to do his PhD at Monash University in Australia. He's currently the convener of the Indonesia program at the Asia Institute and Assistant Dean of International in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Melbourne. You would know him primarily from his columns in Kompas, and also the many publications that he has been involved with about contemporary Indonesia and the issues of politics and society in Indonesia. So I'm very much looking forward to Ariel's talk today. It's great to have him here, and a very warm welcome to him. So I'll now hand over now to Dr. Ariel Herianto. Thank you, Ariel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, Jeff, Mbak Deno, and everybody who spent the time to come to have my talk. Really appreciate this. I feel a bit nostalgic looking at you, definitely, remembering the time when I have to learn my English, among others from Jeff. Unfortunately, my English is still not very good, so I'd like to discuss something about my current research project. So forgive my bad English, but listen to your teachers, because that's definitely a great way of reaching out to the world, because a lot of books and knowledge, unfortunately, is only accessible in English. So it's definitely something that you must do, we all must do, if we want to pursue our careers. I have prepared, and hopefully you have a copy of my handout. I'm not going to talk everything there in the paper, because this is only an outline that would help me, that would remind me of the things that I could say. But I usually tend to be a bit unsystematic when I talk. Please give me the freedom just to jump from topic to topic, as I have to watch my watch, because we will not spend too much time here, because I also would like to play clips of my videos for you to illustrate the points that I like to raise, becoming part of my research agenda. But basically, let me give you a rough idea what I'm trying to do in the last few years and continue in the next few years. I try to understand Indonesia, especially after 1998, with regards to how Indonesians try to redefine themselves, what it means to be Indonesians. You have heard so many times the statement from the government or otherwise that Indonesia is such a diverse country. There's so many different kinds of Indonesians, and yet we are united. Okay? This is not an easy job, to be different, but yet to be united. Okay? How do Indonesians manage that will become one area of my interest. But even that is a very vast topic. I cannot possibly do research on that vast topic. I have to reduce it. And I narrow down my scope of study on how Indonesians express their identities in pop cultures. In particular, I refer to films, performing arts, televisions, advertisement, and so on. Okay? Why do I choose this? Partly because I like them. I like those cultural things, pop culture especially, but also because, number one, this kind of culture addressed and consumed by millions of Indonesians. Okay. But despite this fact, not many scholars take a very serious attention to this sort of culture. Most scholars of Indonesian studies would look at, for example, the so-called traditional culture, wayang, gamelan. They go to Solo or Keraton to study the, very highly valued heritage of Javanese culture, which we usually call traditional culture. Others would go to Taman Ismail Marzuki, study the avant-garde. Okay? Or others study what we would call the official national culture. Okay? Pop culture is something different. But this pop culture is one that so many Indonesians, literally millions of Indonesians, embraced. And yet it is something that is understudied academically by so many scholars. And that was why I try to understand that better and produce something of significance in my research. But how do I go about it? How do I start to try to identify the different possibility of being Indonesian among Indonesians? In order to do that, I look at contemporary Indonesia and compare it to what it was like in 1945 when Indonesia just became independent. And I thought there are at least 3 or 4, I would say 4 major forces that made Indonesia in the 40s that still make Indonesia today. Okay? And here we come to our handout. The first one is what I would call the diverse set of vernacular cultures, vernacular traditions, okay? Of which the Javanese is definitely the most salient because of the demographic number of the Javanese, because of the number of population of the island of Java, somehow because of the long history tradition of Java with its court culture. Javanese, not being the only one in Indonesia, but definitely become so dominant in Indonesia. That's one example, okay, of what makes today's Indonesia as well as independent Indonesia. But we also have 3 major forces that become the modernizers of Indonesia. Okay? I identify here, there can be a lot more actually, but I just want to identify the major 3. Okay? The first would be Islam. Okay? Islam came to many parts of Asia, in Southeast Asia definitely, as a new modernizing factor. Okay? Then also came, after about 600, 700 years later after Islam, the European cultures. But European culture, which we usually, for convenience, call the West, is not actually one and the same. There are different kinds of Western cultures and forces and ideologies. Okay? Indonesia has received at least 2 major ideologies of the West, modern Western culture. One is liberalism and its various derivatives, variants. In Indonesia, sometimes we understand it by another term like developmentalism. Others call it capitalism. Okay. They're not the same, but somehow they are related. I don't think we have the time now to elaborate that. Okay. If you want to ask questions, we'll be happy to answer them. But what is usually forgotten or not allowed to be studied in Indonesia, especially now, is Marxism. Marxism made a strong contribution to the formation of the nation-state of Indonesia, at least until 1965. I don't know how many of you are aware that the so-called Indonesian Communist Party was the largest in the world outside China and Soviet Union. And yet, it's usually, most Indonesians are not allowed to study that after 1960. Okay? But despite its being banned, the sentiment for particular kind of social justice to the little people which in the past was inspired by communism, still very much alive. In the celebration of, for example, Marsina, the labor activist, you have a little bit of resonance of what we call either Marxism or its derivatives, communitarianism, populism, and so on. Let me go back to Indonesia today now, so that we'll not be detained too long in the past history. Today, with the demise of the New Order government, we have almost totally lost the fourth force, the Marxist force, the Marxism, But we have an outburst, so to speak, of the different major forces. Javanism still is very much alive. And then you have liberalism. If you go to the city, you'll see how Jakarta, cosmopolitan life, or even the rest of the country is increasingly liberated, that increasingly or social life is left to the forces of the market to negotiate, that everybody is expected somehow to take her or his own responsibility and maximize their interest in a civil way, of course. But you also have definitely noticed one of the most important changes that has taken place since 1998 is the rise of political Islam that was repressed by the New Order in the 70s and the 80s. So things that were repressed under the New Order suddenly come up to the surface and have to compete once again, like it was in 1945 when Indonesia declared independence. When Indonesia declared independence, there was a great deal of tension among those who brought that independence. What Indonesian nation state should be like? Should it be more Islamic? Should it be more socialistic? Should it be more this or that? In the end, people try to compromise, to negotiate. Not everybody was happy, by the way, if you look at history. One or the other get the upper hand, get dominant, until the Big Bang, the climax in 1965, with only one winner, and for 30 years. When that winner, the military, liberal, developmentalist-oriented dictatorships collapsed in 1998, those who were repressed come up to the fore again. So this is what happened. What I would like to study is how they express themselves, not so much in the parliament, not so much in the justice system, but rather in popular cultures. How they try to sell their ideas, how to correct Indonesia, how to rebuild Indonesia after 1998, according to their belief, either this or that. And how do they express, how do they advocate the ideas to the populations when the populations do not feel being lectured, when they feel they're not being transformed into something, but at their leisure, when they try to watch entertainment. And yet, entertainment is never neutral. There's always some tension. And the one good example that I'd like to emphasize for our discussion today, and some clips that I'm going to show in a minute, is the case of Inul Daratista. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. Unfortunately, the case of Inul has been debated, and the controversy is very much emphasized over the question of moral decency. What is appropriate and not appropriate for a female dancer, performer. What is usually not enough discussed is what I have mentioned earlier. The case of Inul, I think, is a very good illustration of how Indonesia tried to design, tried to pursue and rebuild a better modern nation state. Is Inul a good example of a good future Indonesian culture? Or is it a good example of a very bad Indonesian culture? The way I try to look at this is that the case of Inul Daratista is almost like a battleground for different forces to try to compete with one another, including the competition between Islam and Javanism. As you all know, Inul comes from Java with a very strong Javanese culture, which sometimes overlap, amalgamated sometimes in tension with the more pious Islam teachings. And the case of Inul is definitely a very good example of that. But the case of Inul is also a good example of how for many years under the New Order, social life is ruled by strong patriarchal interest and logic. That male is the dominant, species, so to speak, gender. Women are born to be subordinate gender, for example. It's been challenged by people. And Inul, I think, is a very good example of how that patriarchal culture is being challenged. Okay? But the same case of Inul also indicates how the idea of local and national is in great tension after then. With the great spirit of decentralization, a lot of people outside Jakarta feel they have, for long, have not been recognized, their sovereignty, and this is the good time. Okay? I don't know if you recall, when Inul was being criticized by many people, people in Surabaya took to the street, demonstrated in protection of Inul, and say, Inul for president in 2004. I don't know if you remember that. There's a long local sentiment being offended back then in East Java, that this is not just Inul, this is our Inul. Okay? Those people abuse Inul. Did you remember Inul was, at the time, was told to leave Jakarta during the controversy of Undang-Undang anti-pornography. And Inul was told to leave Jakarta because she definitely corrupted Jakarta culture. So there's a great defense from East Javanese. So that one area again. The classes, this is another identity. What it means to be poor Indonesian and rich Indonesian. Okay? There's a good example again of how Inul is being competed between the rich and the poor. Inul came from a very poor family, but become a star that will be almost sold, so to speak, her singing and performance by big capital in Jakarta. That story of Inul is a story of all that tension that I'm trying to study. Classes, gender, local, national, Islam, tradition, all of them. Okay? Before I speak too long, let me now play, I guess, some of the clips here that I have. The first clip here will show you, I don't know how many of you have seen Inul. The first set of clips is Inul before she was famous. Okay? When Inul was kampungan. Accidentally, she came from the same area as I did. Okay? So, I heard of her, I knew of her before she became nationally famous. Okay? Back then, when she performed, the whole village, the whole area, neighboring village will come to the city to watch her. So, cityscape, the scenery in the city is like in Jakarta at the end of a soccer game. You can imagine that. Really a lot of people in the street. This is what happened when Inul came to town. When Inul did not come, people are very angry. Where is Inul? Give us Inul. People are very angry. So most other concerts in East Java, small little towns, would only come if Inul was there, and would be very angry if Inul wasn't there. It was back then. Okay? And what is so fascinating about Inul to me is when she was on stage, she always became not only a singer, she would always become like the center of the universe. She controlled everything and everyone. To begin with, if you are Javanese, you understand that. Number one, most dangdut performers there, if they come to stage, they would speak as if they were on national television. They would speak in bahasa Indonesia. Para penonton, lagu selanjutnya akan kami persembahkan adalah, and then they become sexy, okay? Inul doesn't speak that way. Inul speaks in rough, low, Ngoko Javanese. Doesn't matter who are present. The village head was there, she would point her finger at him. Hey, Bapak Lurah! And then she speak in Ngoko. And she speak in other kind of really unrespectful language. It's very rare. The moment she was transferred to Jakarta and become a star, she started to become very timid, pacified, and become very sopan. I feel very disappointed. Very disappointed. Okay? So this is one good example. Let me just play this. Play this one. See. So you understand. Some people get offended. What's going on here? This is not reformasi. This is bad, okay? But this is a long history. If you understand the history of Tayuban and Jaipongan, again, this whole tension between what it means to be us, indigenous, and what it means to be good Muslim. There's always great tension there. What it means to be a woman, what about being man, and so on, okay? I have to skip, but if you are interested, I can show you that again, more. But for the moment, I'll show you something else, okay? I have to go back here. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is I'll show you just very briefly the audience. Here, I think this is fascinating. Oh, what's going on? Sorry. This is not right. Sorry. If you want to see it, I'll show you how diverse Dangdut is. Dangdut is usually associated with eroticism. This is not true. Let me show you something. Oh, back again. Sorry. I'm a bit disorganized here. I'm trying to go back down there. Here. What I'll try to show you what it's like to be Inul after she becomes successful in Jakarta. There. No. So the difference. So she used to perform under plastic roof with bamboos. When it rains, it's just destroyed. Okay? Now look at her. Because liberalism, capitalism discovered her. Turned her into a star in Jakarta. And she was performing Rindu Inul after 3 months of hiding. Because there's a lot of attack against her. And she became really an instrument of all kinds of advertisements. Costume by somebody, cosmetic by somebody, this and that. Okay. So which Inul do you like better? Before or after? She became very polite, good citizen. See? There's no Javanism there. Not Islam either. Simply, just one westernized performer there. Look at her clothing. But you notice she will not dance ngebar anymore here. No more. All the celebrities, big shots are present, and there'll be an interview with them. So the show was prepared by Trans TV in order to give support to Inul. Why? Because I think a lot of business people are worried. If this kind of show is not allowed, their business is gone, go bankrupt. So they have to come to defend Inul, not in the interest of Inul, but their own interest. Okay? To become business. So Indonesia has many things. there's business people, there's local people in Java, there's Inul, there's many. They're the Muslim pious people. And this competition, I think, will continue to go on. But as I said, it is my job as a researcher to try to understand Indonesia at this level. Not what the president's speech is. This is one thing. Okay? So when I have a lot of students coming to Melbourne to study with us, I try, this is my also bias, I try to introduce to them the idea that Indonesia is not only what happened at the palace. It's not only what happened at the news, as being broadcast at the news, but also what happened when people watch sinetron, when people watch entertainment. This is also Indonesia. So there is also pop Islam, actually. There's a lot of all kinds of how Islam is packaged in all kinds of movie industries, R&B music, sometimes rap, which make it a lot more colorful, I think. I think I should stop for a moment just to see if you have any objections, questions, comments. I can always discuss more. I can always play more if you like. But for the moment, let me pause and see if you have any comments or questions. Anyone?